Yet? Can you hear me? Kyle, we good? Okay. Folks, we have some seats along the wall, and there's one or two seats in the middle here next to Baxter. He's kind of a scary looking dude, so right in the middle there. Did you think we were going to have this many people? No. I was hoping we'd have this many people, and we also have folks online, so thanks to everyone who is joining us online. My name is President Bill Kelly, the president here at Christopher Newport University, and I am really thrilled for the opportunity today to explore our past and think about our future. So thank you for joining us today for this important discussion, and my thanks to the audience here in person and for those joining us through live stream. Christopher Newport College was founded 62 years ago, and this beautiful room and this spectacular fine arts center is just one indication of how far we have come as a university. The university superbly serves Virginia and the world. We help power the Newport News economy and enrich the lives of our neighbors through the arts, athletics, and opportunities for lifelong learning. That progress has come at a human cost, though, and that's why it's important that we have the conversation that we're going to have today. Today, our goal is to learn about and more deeply understand our history as an institution. What we know is that the institution was located by the city on land along Shoe Lane that was home to a valuable and well-established neighborhood. The residents of that neighborhood predominantly were African Americans who lost their homes, many due to the use of the government's use of eminent domain. Our panelists, and I can't thank you all for being here enough. We appreciate you taking time out of your lives to join us and for all the work and research that you've done on this topic. Our panelists today will help us fully comprehend the impact of Christopher Newport's growth, and I thank again each and every one of you for offering your expertise and your insight. I look forward to listening and learning myself as a new member of this community and encourage us all to engage in a productive dialogue that will help us as a city and as a university community. Two related programming notes. On Monday at 11 a.m., we'll be having a community walk, beginning on campus and then through the Shoe Lane, Riverside neighborhood to Riverside Elementary, and then we'll come back. It's a short walk, but it will give us a chance to learn more about the neighborhood next to our campus, and Newport News city officials, law enforcement, and educational leaders will be joining us, and I urge you to join in as well. There is a flyer about the walk by the doors. I believe we have those set up and ready to go on your way out. And also, I'd just like to say the Torgler Center, the building that we're in here, facility, is hosting two exhibits on the floor just above us in the Edwards Gallery. Those exhibits showcase the work of two prominent African-American artists. My wife Angie and I had the opportunity to visit the opening of the exhibit last week, and I encourage you all to stop by, maybe after this discussion or over the next couple months, to view these important exhibits. Today's discussion, the walk, and the exhibits are important steps on a journey that began more than 60 years ago. There are many, many more steps to come, and this conversation will help us all understand how to take those steps in the right direction. Today, the university is in the listening and learning mode. Our panelists and moderator are here to contribute their personal insights. It is important to note that they don't speak on behalf of the university, but they speak on behalf of the research and the time spent living in this community. I want to thank our moderator, Regina Brayboy. She's deeply experienced in guiding events like this. She leads performance-centered consulting and directs a community-based coalition, Healthy Suffolk. She is a senior fellow for the Human Capital with the Conference Board, and Regina is a member of the CNU Board of Visitors, and she's chair of the CNU's President's Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we just wrapped up our November meeting just a couple minutes ago. So would you please join me in welcoming our panelists and our moderator, Regina Brayboy.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. One of the things I really want to emphasize about my connection with CNU is I started out here as a student a long time ago, and we won't say how long. But, you know, I feel like I'm a student today, And that's the approach that I'm taking toward this moderation. And so I will ask some questions and also entertain your questions. And I'm excited for the things that we're going to learn about CNU. So I want to introduce the panelists to you. We have Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, who is the Endowed Professor of Virginia Black History and Culture at Norfolk State University and a public historian and author. Reverend William Spencer is the pastor of First Baptist Church Morrison in Newport News. The church's original structure on Warwick Boulevard was torn down to make way for the university. Audrey Perry Williams is president of the Hampton Roads Association for the study of African American life and history.
Can you lower the mic?
Dr. Johnny Finn is a CNU geographer whose research focuses on racial, economic, and environmental inequality that is the legacy of nearly a century of segregationist housing policies. Dr. Philip Hamilton is a CNU historian and the author of A History of the University, and his research focuses on the American Revolution and the history of Virginia. So our format today is that, first of all, you will hear as a live audience. We have a live stream audience. I will direct questions to the panelists. We envision this is going to last about an hour and 15 minutes, but if you have to leave, we totally understand that. And then there will be an opportunity for questions from the audience to the panelists. So I will start with the first question. What happened on Shoe Lane? Please share your perspective based on research of the events and decisions that led to the establishment and expansion of CNU on Shoe Lane and how eminent domain played a role. Dr. Hamilton, you go first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, I came upon this story when I was researching and writing the history of CNU about 10 years ago, and I first heard about it during an interview I was conducting with Jim Windsor. Windsor was the second president of CNC at the time, but he had worked here as early as 1962, so he was here during most of the events that had transpired. And he referred to the Shoe Lane controversy obliquely. He said that there was considerable debate within Newport News over where to put the campus, and he said that race was involved. So I began to research the issue more seriously myself. And now, as everyone knows, when CNU's campus was placed here in the early 1960s, this was a very tense time in Virginia. It was a very tense time, racially speaking, in the state in terms of civil rights. I mean, you had black leaders, the black community that was attempting to, they were demanding integration and equal access. You also had white leaders who were resisting black demands across the board. And I also learned from my research that the grounds that we're currently on were owned by a small but thriving black community that dated back as early as the 1880s. Now, I eventually concluded by the end of my research that between 1961 and 1963, the all-white Newport News City Council had purposefully taken these lands via eminent domain, not only to remove the blacks who were living here, but above all, they took the lands here to stop a black real estate developer, a man named William Walker, from building a suburban housing development in the open area, the interior of Shoe Lane, these Shoe Lane properties. And Walker envisioned this suburban housing development for middle-class blacks who were then leaving the downtown region of Newport News as part of the overall suburbanization process that occurred after World War II. In other words, the city wanted to halt the creation of a more densely settled black community before it even started, one that would have been located in a predominantly white section of town, and that's what Midtown Newport News was. It was overwhelmingly white. but it also, I believe they also wanted to stop a rather densely settled black community, given the location of it to the James River Country Club, which of course was all white at that point in time. Now Windsor told me that there was considerable debate in the city, and there certainly was as I researched this more deeply. There were a series of very acrimonious city council meetings that were packed with both whites and black residents here. And at the meeting, William Walker and his brother, Philip Walker, who was a prominent civil rights attorney at the time, they put forth some formidable arguments against taking their lands. First of all, they pointed out that, given the Jim Crow restrictions of the era, there were very few good locations for blacks to settle in this section of Newport News. And so Walker had hoped that this would be one of the few areas where blacks could actually live. They also pointed out that an equally good location was available for the campus to be located on just to the north here, along a tract then known as Roy's Lane. It's where Todd Stadium is currently located. Moreover, the Walker brothers pointed out that the owners of those lands at Roy's Lane, they wanted to sell, they were willing to sell, and the properties at Roy's Lane were assessed at approximately about half as much as the assessed properties at Shoe Lane. And then finally, the Walker brothers even asked the residents who were living here at the time to write to William and Mary's Board of Visitors, asking them to intervene on their behalf. And that was because William and Mary our CNC at the time was a branch campus of William and Mary. And so we were under the governance of William and Mary at this time. But all to no avail. The city council, the pleas of the Walkers and others among the community members, they fell on deaf ears, and the city ended up taking their properties, or began the process of taking their properties in the middle of 1962. And then to add insult to injury, the city then tried to undersell the Shoe Lane property owners by making them offers based on clearly outdated property assessments that were about a decade old. But nevertheless, by 1963, all of the land had been taken via eminent domain, and in 1964, the first academic building on CNC grounds was begun to be built. Now, lastly, before I hand it off to my colleagues, in the course of my research, I found that other higher educational institutions in Virginia were doing the exact same thing that happened here. For instance, in Richmond and in Norfolk, as VCU and as ODU expanded because of growing student populations, city planners targeted their expansions into long-established black neighborhoods. So what happened here was part of a larger pattern that was happening throughout Virginia, or in areas of Virginia, but also throughout the country. And so why don't I hand it off to my colleagues, in particular Cassandra and Johnny, who are experts in neighborhood displacement and this whole issue. So, yeah.
Cassandra, you want to pick up?
Sure. Thank you so much. I love to follow someone who is very thorough about telling the story, and I have the privilege of just adding a few things to that particular story. As Dr. Hamilton said toward the end, there's a pattern. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that you see is the pattern, and that pattern is twofold. One, they were all about creating a solid white section, a section that was receiving a lot of resources from the city as well as from the state. Secondly, it was always Virginia's white institutions that were coming in and taking over those spaces at the time that African Americans essentially were not allowed to even be a student at those institutions. And so you would see this pattern repeated. He mentioned Norfolk, for example. So we're talking about Lambert's Point in Norfolk, an area that had a solid middle class, lower middle class, business-owning Black community. They were small mom and pop businesses, as were most businesses in this country, by the way. And the individuals who lived in that community were close-knit. And when they settled there, they settled in an area that was rural, just like with Shoe Lane. So when a community is rural, that means that these laws regarding redlining that were put in place by 1940 didn't apply to them. This was farmland. And so people were able to move into those areas. In addition, Shoe Lane, as well as places in formerly Princess Anne County, which is now Virginia Beach, what they called the suburbs of Norfolk, Lambert's Point was a suburb of Norfolk. At the time, you started to see an African-American community form there in the 1890s. Many of these individuals settled there because that's where the contraband camps were. The same thing was true with Shoe Lane. There were lots of contraband camps. Now, of course, the American government called all African Americans, both free and enslaved, as contrabands of war during the Civil War. That was a very politically tactical move, but it was also humanely dismissive, because contraband is something that your enemy is using to fight against you, and therefore you have the right to take or not return that contraband to your enemy. So it's still seeing people as things, as property, as opposed to human beings. And so all individuals who were freedom-seeking during the Civil War, African Americans, especially those who had been enslaved, went to these camps. And these camps were usually founded by Civil War troops. And many of those individuals became some of the first students, or their children became some of the first students at Hampton Normal Institute that became Hampton University, or Howard University, or any of the other HBCUs that were created around the time, actually pre-existed the creation, but were anywhere in the 1850s, 1860s, 1880s. These individuals were very much interested in educating themselves, in making sure that they became professionals, and of course, making sure that they passed down so that they paid it back to their communities. They wanted to have a very solid, powerful community that supported each other. And the only way to do that was to be independent, in some cases in terms of your business, independent, so that the community bought from one another. They prospered together. And then, of course, you always have to have educators. And I don't know why our society demeans educators. And speaking as a long-standing educator, I always tell people who give me this quote, those who can't teach, I tell them, oh, okay, so that surgeon who just operated on you was taught by somebody who could not conduct surgery on their own? How is that possible? You know, educators are practitioners of their field. That's why when you have scholars, we publish, because we're practitioners of our field, and we hopefully will educate young people, inspire them, some of them become scholars, and to build on the work, on the foundation that we've laid for them. And so looking at these different communities, they all had similar origins. And they all came out of this time period of the post-Civil War era. They were birthed not randomly, but they were close to where they were in camps close to where those communities emerged. But they became problematic as the white community began expanding out and wanting to consolidate, especially areas of wealth. of white wealth. And these black communities became inconvenient to that particular agenda. And the power of government was used against them. And that's not new. And it has even repercussions today. And of course, it's still being utilized today. And not just with schools. There was an entire community that was planned by a black realtor in Norfolk called W.T. Mason Sr. It was supposed to be in the area along Virginia Beach Boulevard, which is currently where Norfolk Industrial Park is located. And he was developing this community because the federal law did not allow money to be provided to African American developers or any developers that would create livable, safe communities, suburban communities for African Americans. Would not fund that, period. They funded it only for whites, not for blacks. And here was a black realtor coming up with his own money to create a safe community, but that community was inconvenient to the city of Norfolk. Why? Because the people and their children would be near a white school. And they did not want black and white children to go to school together. This was in the 1950s. So this tendency of using the threat of eminent domain or the reality of eminent domain has been weaponized for many years by our federal government, our state government, and our local government. And that is the bigger story of Shoe Lane. And I'm going to hand it off now to my colleague.
Dr. Finn.
Well, that's quite an act to follow. First, thanks very much for the invitation to be a part of this panel. I would also like to take a moment to say that my colleague Phil's article and book on this are both outstanding, but also the recent, and I think probably the catalyst for us all being here. If you haven't read the ProPublica series by Brandy Kellum, who's with us in the audience today, I would urge you to read that. It's an outstanding piece of journalism and an outstanding piece of research, and I would urge you to read that on ProPublica, which is not paywalled. So, I think a lot of the points that I wanted to make have already been made, and so I want to tread lightly and not burn time with redundancies, but I will say as an urban geographer, I'm particularly interested in the shapes of our cities in the present day and how they are the material kind of end point of all kinds of social and historical processes in the past. And I think Cassandra just said something really important, that this is not random. The shape of our cities today, and if my students are here, I say this every single day to them, the shape, the actual physical form of our cities is not random. It was put this way, it was built this way to benefit someone. And who did it benefit? It benefited the people who had the power to shape the landscape in this way. And we, whether we know it or not, we live on the remnants of the kind of these unequal social and historical processes made real and made physical in the present. And so I'm really thrilled that we're having, President Kelly, that you've invited us to have this conversation, because whether we know this history or not, we are all implicated in this story. And I just want to, the only point I think I want to add to this is how systemic, just to kind of emphasize how systemic and how structural and how intentional this was. A couple of the threads that both Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Newby-Alexander mentioned was both the use of eminent domain to displace black communities for the purpose largely of creating or building white institutions, and also how that intersected with the racial politics of the moment of the early of the civil rights era. And I'll just highlight so that we have a sense of how systematic this was just in the Hampton Roads region, just in the period of about 1950 to about 1965. The way that what we generally under the rubric of urban renewal, the way that the local housing authorities and local governments marshaled federal money to remove the black community in Lambert's Point to build Old Dominion University, to remove a racially integrated neighborhood at what was then called Atlantic City, which is now the home of Centera Norfolk General Hospital and EVMS, to remove Broad Creek Village, an originally whites-only World War II housing project for GIs that became an integrated neighborhood that was removed and is today an industrial park in Norfolk. And there's several other of these, and local historians have done really interesting work drawing the line straight to the fact that in the post-Brown era, where we couldn't have overt we couldn't have overt school segregation, one way that city leaders in the area used eminent domain and used urban renewal funds to create residential segregation and create literal lines of residential segregation in housing to then de facto continue to segregate the schools. And I haven't even mentioned interstate highways, and don't get me started on that. But let me not go down that rabbit hole. And yeah, I think otherwise, I think the points that I wanted to make have been more eloquently made already. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Pastor Spencer, do you have any comments or anything you'd like to add?
Just want to say real quick, and my colleagues have done an excellent job providing historical context. And so I just want to add just one quick point just to drive home. And forgive me, I'm a Baptist preacher. Anybody know anything about Baptist preachers? We'll tell a story in a minute. And so, and so hey, got a witness there. But throughout the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, there's a group of individuals called lepers. Lepers was those individuals who had leprosy. Leprosy was a skin disease, and because they had leprosy, they were treated like second-class citizens. They were not allowed to be in mainstream society. They were put out of mainstream society. As a matter of fact, they built colonies outside the city gates. And so you are confined to these colonies. If you allow me to contemporize it, you're confined to the ghetto. You're treated less than, again, because of a skin disease. And so we're here today because a group of families had a skin condition. It wasn't leprosy. But it was the mere fact that their skin had been darkened by Mother Nature's sun. And so we cannot forget that the core of why we're here is because of a group of families that had a skin condition that made them less than the rest of mainstream society.
Audrey, do you have any, would you like to add?
Can you hear me? Well, thank you for having me. I would like to just say a few things, and they have done an excellent job, but I wanted to pose to you two questions. But first I want to say, we've already established that 60-plus years ago, the white leadership of the city of Newport News came in and grabbed up this thriving black community because they needed a school. Oh, you know that, right? Two questions. First, number one, was there another location that the school could have been built? Yes. Number two, did they pay the fair market value for the land? The answer is no. Absolutely to both questions, no. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to white privilege. That's what it looks like. And that's what we as black Americans, that's what we see. It doesn't matter, you know, and I don't care whether you got money or not, if you've got that color. That's what this country has done. So that is an introduction. They could have built it somewhere else. They said that. Why didn't they pay them the money? They had it. Well, hey, I don't have to. I'm white. I got it.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, panelists, for addressing that first question. So our second question has to do with how was, and I think we've alluded to this, but how was the established community impacted by the location and expansion of CNU? And I will come to Pastor Spencer first.
Well, I want to say this. Imagine as an African-American people, you have survived the brunt of Jim Crow era. You survived being beaten, spit on. You survived being subject to racial slurs. You've always heard about that American dream of owning a home. And now you finally have that opportunity to do such. You've beaten all of the odds. You've, lack of a better term, you started from the bottom, now you're here, right? You've managed to matriculate into university colleges and earn your degree. You've worked, and you've done that all in a society that is still not the best society to live in as it relates to racial tension. But you've managed to do that. You now own your home. You've accomplished all of that to now have it taken away from you. You know, how would you feel, you know, if the very thing that you worked hard for, you sacrificed for, has now been taken away from you? You know, how would you feel if everything that you've done, you've tried to do to leave a legacy, to leave for your children and your children's children, to now have that taken away from you at the drop of a dime? And so these are what these families felt. And so can I sit here and say that the placement of CNU, the expansion of CNU, did not have an effect on the community, on the city? I can't say that. It did. You know, did it make an economic impact on this area of the city and the city as a whole? Absolutely. But the question that we must ask is, at what cost? And then the question is, do the benefits outweigh the costs? And we got to look at that. It's more than the cost of dirt being dug out the ground. It's more than the cost of bricks and mortar going up. But there is a greater cost here. And again, do the benefits outweigh the cost of CNU being placed here and the expansion of it?
Audrey?
I want you to just close your eyes a minute and just listen to me as I make my reflections. I want you to just imagine that you are a descendant of a former enslaved person. Now, looking at our history, there are three ways that you can be free. You either escape as a slave, your enslaver allows you an opportunity to work and you can buy your freedom. And the other one is that he or she actually free you. So you arrive in this area of Shoe Lane. Through hard work, you build a home for you and your family, and a tight-knit community comes together. You watch out for each other. There is no use of the word me because we become the word of the day. We support and take care of our new family. The community is growing. New people are joining every day. We are thriving, minding our own business and staying on our land. Then all of a sudden, a member of the neighboring white community does a drive-by and looks towards your area, and he sees all of this prosperity, homes looking nice, manicured lawns, and he said, we don't want them that close to us. They got to go. So they said they need a college. So let's use eminent domain to take their land, because they don't need to be too close to us and bringing down the value of our property. And besides, why are we going to put a school somewhere where they're not going to learn anything anyway? The residents put up a good fight, but they didn't win. For black people, family is important. Why is this true, you might ask? When we were enslaved people, families, as you know today, did not exist. Husbands and wives could be sold away from each other. Children could be sold at birth. When the slave auctions a mother and a baby together, they might take the mother and they throw the baby to the side. And at the end of the auction, they have all of these babies that are there and nobody to claim them. So they are there, and this is what they know. Following the Civil War, our former enslaved people were looking for their families. Some found them and others did not. Therefore, that the community that existed in this Shoe Lane area was something that the former residents had to get used to not having, and that impacted their lives, as they once do. The land was not taken because they were not taking care of it and not thriving. It was once again white privilege raising its ugly head. And as from the Black American perspective, my perspective, that's what we see every day. It wasn't, they could have used somewhere else to go, but it impacted this close-knit community that had come together, because when we were enslaved people, we didn't have that. So once you get out, you got land, something you didn't own. So now you've got all of this, you want to share it with other blacks in the community, and now all of a sudden the city says, you're too close. We got this neighborhood over here that's white affluent. They've got this segregated golf course. We don't want you over here. So that's what happened here. It's not the matter of there was nowhere else to put this college. It's a matter of racism, systemic racism that still does exist in this country.
Thank you, Audrey. Cassandra?
It's hard to follow these two. I'm just going to say a few things regarding this issue. And the first is, there's an issue of erasure. So when you talk about how past, you can lie about it, but truth has a way of always rising to the top. And what are you going to do? You're going to keep lying. And so you create a really bad situation for yourself because everybody knows a liar pretty soon. And so our society is at a critical precipice as we go into, really, it takes about 20 years to get into the new century. So just as W.E.B. Du Bois said that the problem of the 20th century will be the color line, the problem of the 21st century will be how do we reconcile? How do we create this nexus point of reconciling what we said about the past versus what actually happened in the past? And how do we reconcile the harm that we did and continue to do with how we can move forward? Because you cannot break somebody's leg and then tell them it's time to keep running. You have to heal that leg. You have to help that person heal. And then after healing and after rehab, then you could talk about maybe running. But we haven't even gotten to the point of recognizing, acknowledging that we broke somebody's leg. But I am appreciative to CNU because this event is, in my mind, the first step, the first and most important step, and that is acknowledgement. But acknowledgement without action is meaningless. And so if you understand harm, the harm caused by this erasure, then you can begin to start thinking about solutions, remediation, and reparative justice.
Other panelists, Phil, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just in terms of going off of Cassandra's point about erasure, the white community did forget very quickly about the shoe lane controversy. But what surprised me when I started to dig into this was how powerfully it was remembered in the black community. And I'll just tell a quick story about this. I had to go downtown to gain access to the old city council meeting minutes. And I called up, I told them what I wanted and the reels of microfilm that I wanted to look at. And when I got down there, I found that most all of the women who worked in the office were African American. And they had actually gone into the microfilm reels, and they had actually printed out all of the relevant meeting minutes for me. And I wanted to check it out just to make sure they hadn't missed anything, and they had not missed anything. And so I was talking to them after I had finished up, and they said that they and their mothers and fathers very much remembered this story, and that really struck me, really for the first time, because I had moved here, from outside of Virginia, and it struck me just how powerfully this event impacted the black community, but the white community just forgot it very, very quickly.
Johnny?
I think I'll save my fire for the final question.
Okay, speaking of the final question, and I think, the panelists have really set the table for this question very nicely, and I know you all have been thinking as well. Why does this history matter today? And what steps, if any, should the university, the city, and concerned citizens be considering as we advance forward? And I throw that out as what should students be thinking about or considering as we advance forward? So I will start with Cassandra. Would you like to tackle why this history matters? And what steps, if any, should the university, the city, concerned citizens, and students be considering? I'm a student, still a student. Yes. Okay. Our question is, why does this history matter today, and what steps, if any, should the university, the city, concerned citizens, and because I'm always a student, and students be considered as we move forward, advance forward.
Thank you. You know, as we talk about history, we have to remember that we study history to understand the present because we're all connected. And what happened in the past does matter very much. It concerns, it influences the way you see your world. It influences your perspective of what's possible. It impacts the way that you interpret the world, you interpret government, you interpret law enforcement. It impacts everything. It impacts your health, because when you look at the health and well-being of the white community versus the black community, you see, and I've had some firsthand experiences with elderly people recently, you see the difference in how black people are treated in hospitals versus white people. These are stark differences, and I'm not talking 30 years ago, I'm talking today. You see the differences in how people perceive other individuals. So history matters. So it's time we get the history right. It's time we stop talking about somebody feeling bad about the past. Who cares how they feel about the past? It's important to talk about what really happened. Your feelings are irrelevant. My feelings are irrelevant. If you have those kinds of feelings, you need to go home and get your pacifier again, because that's like a big baby. Let's be grown-ups and really talk about what happened in the past. And if you are not like some of the people in the past, you should want to talk about the past. Only people who are trying to protect themselves don't want to talk about the racism of the past. And American society has been essentially a racist society from the moment that English people walked onto this continent and started treating the indigenous populations as an obstacle. So let's be real about that. And for those people who keep claiming to be the descendants of Pocahontas, I want to see a DNA test. Having stepped into that big, big pool of quicksand, so be honest and real about the past and make sure that that's in our history books. CNU can make sure that every student crossing the threshold at CNU has had a course looking not only at Shoe Lane, but at other areas, and having conversations and projects dealing with how can CNU be directly involved in healing and in repairing and in creating opportunities for justice. The other thing that can happen is there are things called federal funds. Cities use them all the time. They use poor black people to fund the renewal so that the poor black people, it's like a bad movie, where the black person becomes the hero that sacrifices himself or herself and dies, and the only people who live are white people. And so we don't want black people to keep dying and being removed from the picture so that white people can enjoy the fruits of their sacrifice. And that's what a lot of urban renewal funds have been used to do. So we need to put a stop to that and have a change of course so that the people that those funds are supposed to benefit can actually enjoy the benefits of them. And there are things then that can come. This is a university. That means that there are incredible minds here at this university. And it's a diverse group of minds and intellectual capacities from different disciplines, from history to sociology to psychology to biology to engineering to all of these different disciplines. Surely plans can emerge out of that. And then the political pressure coming from the leadership, coming from the community, coming from the city's political leaders can help to change what was made wrong from the origin point, so that reparative, and I keep mentioning this word, reparative justice can occur, because a lot of people actually believe that their privilege is not privilege. They look at other people who don't have what they have, and they think that they are the ones who've worked hard and those others are just lagabouts. But the story of Shoe Lane hopefully changes that narrative, that you can see that government directly interfered with these families and the hard work that was there, and what they had was taken from them unjustly, unfairly, and with swiftness and with decisiveness. Thank you.
Dr. Finn, you want to bring us your fire now?
Oh. Again, it's hard to follow the people. It's hard to follow my colleagues and panelists up here. Yeah, I think so. I just have basically one kind of general group of thoughts when it comes to where do we go from here. And I think we oftentimes immediately identify kind of things that we can do symbolically. This panel, in a certain sense, is a symbolic gesture, a historical marker, the naming of a park, these kind of symbolic things that we can do. And I think symbolism is really important. I'm very, very glad that we're here, that we're doing this. But I think where we have to go from here is also, it needs to be material. And a recent study of reparations in California that was commissioned by the California legislature, released in 2022, so just a year ago, found that just housing discrimination from 1933 to 1977 in the state of California robbed $569 billion of wealth from Black Californians, from about 2.5 million or 2.75 million Black Californians that were impacted by eminent domain, removal, urban renewal, and all these other discriminatory housing policies. Just in the area of housing is almost $750 billion that was taken from Black Californians. Now, in the context of CNU and the story that we're talking about today, it's obviously a different scale. We're not talking about 2.5 or 2.75 million people. However, if we're looking at any individual family, it is the entirety of a home, of a neighborhood that was lost. It's not a piece, it's not 75%, it's everything that was materially lost, materially taken. And I think that even though most of us can say, well we weren't here, I wasn't born yet. Why am I a part of this? Well, we are a part of this, and I think we need to think about materially, in addition to the symbolic and the representational, how we deal with this material. And I don't have the answer to that. I think we need to have this conversation as a community. I know that Georgetown University is paying reparations to the families of enslaved people who helped to build the university and who were sold in order to keep the university solvent. I know other universities have scholarship programs. I think there's curriculum questions that we can talk about. I think there are very real and very material things that we can do, and I hope that I hope that this is indeed a starting point and not an ending point. Thank you.
Audrey?
I think that why this history matters is I'm the president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Dr. Woodson believed that he needs our story. He feels that our story needs to be told accurately. We have a history. That is why ASALH was founded, because they tried to tell us we didn't have one. And I think it's important that this story and all of the stories like this are told, because there's no way we can heal, I think, until we accept that things are not right. We do not have a democracy because democracy is supposed to take care and ensure that the majority takes care of everybody, and that doesn't happen here. So we've got a lot of issues, and I think that it's important that we tell this story. You have Mulberry Island that happened, Naval Weapons Station, they took that. They had to give a 60-day notice to come in and visit cemeteries as Naval Weapons Station. So we need to have this history told. We need to stop hiding it. And if I tell people that if you tell history like it is, that's all you have to do. But the problem is when you start asking a student, how do you feel about something? How does this make you feel? That's when the issues come. But if you give a person black and white, they can read it and they can see, yes, they took Shoe Lane. Yes, they took Mulberry Island, Seneca Village in New York. All right, we know that. But what's coming up next? That's the problem. But we have to tell this history. I don't know what programs CNU has as far as a way to increase I know black student population here, for one thing. And I don't know, the most recent figure I had was 7%. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that for our area, a school that's built on land that was taken from black Americans, we need to see something a little bit better. We need to see, like I said, I don't know what you have in place, but I do know that some schools, they go out and look for the best and the brightest, okay? And, they don't want to do about that anymore. But I have 2 examples of Christopher Newport. My granddaughter's 29 years old. She was an honor student. She came to Christopher Newport for a college tour. She spent the night. When my sister came to pick her up, you know what she said? I don't want to go back. So I don't know what you all are doing here to encourage it. And about 2 years ago, one of my friends from Maryland, she moved to Alabama last year, but she and her son came to CNU for orientation. They spent the day, they heard the president and all like that, and they were supposed to have an interview at 3 o'clock. Do you know why his mom was somewhere and he was somewhere? He called his mom. You know what he said? I don't want to go here. They don't want me here. So I don't know. I mean, this was a couple of years ago, so I don't know what you're doing. And I like what Cassandra had mentioned earlier when we talked about a requirement that this history is taught when those freshmen come in that door, that they're able to move forward. She mentioned earlier about having a walking tour. Let's get them involved, but not only here, but I mean, it's just amazing that we've got all of this technology. We've got this outstanding institution here, and we're not represented. And like I said, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not working. And we got to do better.
Bill?
Yeah, I'll keep my remarks short so that we have as much time as possible for questions. But I do think it's so important that we remember this history. And I'm reminded by a colleague of mine, Dr. Brian Pawaka. He gave a talk at the commemoration where we dedicated Walker's Green, and he said, what we choose to remember just as much as what we choose to forget makes us who we are today. And that's very, very true. And so like Johnny, I hope that this is a beginning of a conversation that will certainly make some of us, probably all of us, uncomfortable at one point or another, but it is important that we have these conversations.
Pastor Spencer, boy, I'm going to give a Baptist minister the last word so that we can get to Q&A.
Well, I'll tell you this. Up until this point, I questioned why I was actually here. Why me? And up until now, I realize I'm adding the balance to everything, and not to downplay the importance of history that my colleagues have talked about, understand it greatly. I do understand the importance of it, but I also understand what the word tells us, and it says to forget the former things, do not dwell on the past, because God is saying, I'm going to do a new thing. And so I'm looking for a new thing to happen at CNU. CNU was birthed out of racism. And so it's evident that it's still here, as my colleague has mentioned. And so, but you all have the ability to change that narrative. And so I'm looking for a new thing. I'm looking for diversity and inclusion to not just be a word thrown around like a used toothpick, but to actually mean something. I'm looking for that to change the hiring practices. I'm looking for that to change in the admissions. We've talked about ODU, we've talked about VCU. ODU, you look at the enrollment, 45% white, 29% black. VCU enrollment, 43% white, 18% black. Here at CNU, 75% white, 6% black. It's time to do a new thing here at CNU. What better way to honor those who were displaced? You know, reparations, you know, that's great. Scholarships, that's great. All those tangible things, that's great. And I think it's needed. But what better way to honor them than to have a university that looks more like them, than to say we displace you from your home, but not only that, we don't want your children, your grandchildren, or your great-grandchildren to attend the very institution that put you out. CNU, it's time to do a new thing.
We have time for some questions, and so the acoustics in here are pretty good. So there is a microphone, but you can try it from where you are.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't want to like awkwardly shamble. Hi, I'm Matt Johnson. Oh, right. Thank you. No, I will awkwardly shamble, just ignore it. Okay, is this better? Is this, all right, thank you. This is more of like comments, sort of my experience, but also to, foment discussion. But I'm Matthew Johnson. I am a senior, English history major, so obviously I'm here, and passionate about this because I am Black, I am queer, and I go to a school where that is not actually popular. And I think it's really important, and we talked about like having this and why we're doing it. I think it's important to be discussing this right now because while it did happen in the past, and while we need to focus on the past, part of focusing on this right now and part of what we're doing right now is trying to change CNU's culture. Because I think this school, I mean, we're a PWI, 75% white is insane to me. We are a school built around a premise of whiteness, look around. And this school, the culture within favors white students, it favors whiteness. So when we're looking here to Shoe Lane and to what the school has done, I think we're starting a progress towards a cultural shift. When I think about Shoe Lane and what we're talking about, I think about a talk I had with a current professor here, Dr. Santoro, former president. Some of you might be grumbling. He told me that when he was the president here, he actually went out to the Black communities, and instead of saying anything and recognizing what CNU is and what it was and what it did, he looked to Black congregations in churches and to the members of a Black community and told them that they are not African American, but that they are American, and that they should stop emphasizing the hyphen, that African American. And instead of recognizing who we are, he helped to build a culture of ignorance and erasure that Dr. Alexander mentioned. I'm also going to check my phone because I had notes. And so I think when we're here and talking about this, that's sort of where we're starting. And if we also think about why we're not here because everyone started suddenly, not to be skeptical, but everyone started suddenly caring. We're here because there was publicity. This was called out. The university has to respond or else we look like we don't care. But it's not to downplay what's happening. We still care, we're here, we're talking about it. But I think it's worth exploring why we are. And I think, too, that the culture at CNU, again, is built around ignorance, is built around erasure. I think about Shoe Lane, and I think about the fact that every year I see my residents, I'm an RA, they come in and ask me how ghetto Newport News is, which is insane to me, but to them, because the area around us is black, it's ghetto. How the campus itself, certain areas are considered ghetto because they are predominantly black, and how they are coming from these upper middle class areas, Nova, and looking around at destabilized black community and pointing to black people and the community around us as the ones who put themselves in that position. We don't consider, largely in America, we don't consider that it was whiteness and white supremacy that put black people in that position, but we place the impetus on the black community as the ones who have put themselves in that situation. And I think my final point, sorry, I'm really bad at being brief. My final point is that I do think there's so much that can be done at CNU. This is a start, but I do think there needs to be these sorts of institutional structural changes. A DEI curriculum, that is something I actually worked on with Dr. Hopkins to propose. I went through the course catalog, and I tried, and we worked, and we submitted it, and it has largely been ignored. From what I understand, it's actually being reviewed because the issue of race is too much to handle. So we're here talking about Shoe Lane because CNU was built on, thrives off of, and still exists as a racist institution that destabilized an entire black community. And so many of the thousands of students here do not really realize, do not care, and instead benefit from everything that we destroyed in creating the university. So I think that we as students, those of you who are here, we are the ones that have to put the pressure on university officials, on administration. We are the ones who have to start leading the education. We are the ones who have to place that pressure because we see it's typically when pressure is placed that a conversation starts. Otherwise, we'll have another Walker's Green situation. We'll do something symbolic, and a few years later, we'll have to do it again because everyone forgot. We can't let this be it. I mean, we're having a walk Monday, but we have to keep having these walks. We have to keep talking. And so I think, as I'm leaving the university in May, that this is something that has to happen now. And it has to happen so that the university's culture itself can change, so that we can actually be a better university, and so that we're not just throwing around words and symbolism. I think we owe it to the 20 black families that we displaced, and the lives that we ruined, and the community and city that we destabilized, to do something as students and faculty members for the future, and to establish it in posterity at CNU. That was a lot.
Dr. Hamilton. Good afternoon, Madam Moderator and distinguished panelists. My name is Winston G. Favor, and I'm a CNU alumnus of the class of 2003. I have lived and breathed this community because of my work through the Mariners Museum with the Hidden Histories program, where I researched the families of the African-American men who built the museum. Many of them attended First Baptist Church Morrison. I have 2 comments and 1 question. My first comment is just to correct the history. The original First Baptist Church Morrison was actually on the property of the Mariners Museum. It was not it was not on Warwick. Second, The current mayor of Pittsburgh, Ed Gainey, he is from the line of Talton, which was a family here in this community. So my question for you all is this. Did the organizers of this program consider contacting the descendants of the family from this community to participate today? I ask because the families can give you personal perspectives that will bring this whole thing together. No disrespect to anyone that's on the panel, but everyone is really talking either generally or based on just what they've learned. And in my opinion, we need to hear from the family representatives that are in the audience today. We have the school's perspective, we have a general perspective, but not the community's perspective. So with that, I say thank you.
Yes. Good evening, good afternoon, well, it's still afternoon. But first, I want to define the area. Shoe Lane, yes, was a major drag, but you also had Moore's Lane, which was a part of that, and Prince Drew Lane. That was the area that was targeted for this conspiracy that started this university. My next point, which is when we have this conversation, I'm assuming we will continue. Yes, CNU was the benefactor of that, but as we have learned, it wasn't just the university. You had city council, and here tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have City Councilman Long who's here. So there is certainly, you're being heard by city council. Granted, it's not the current city council that was here, but nonetheless, they are representing that entity. And perhaps even the State Department, because this conspiracy opened the doors for this to happen. And in order for any solution to be brought forth, you have to have all those stakeholders there. They may know of different ways and solutions to bring forth any type of reparation or change. I mean, we might think it's appropriate for what has happened so that we can move forward. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Millicent Brown Wilson, and I live on Moore's Lane. And I heard a lot about Mr. Walker and his brother, but I want it to be known by everyone in this room that the land from Warwick and Mariners Museum, where Ferguson Center is now, down to Prince Drew, down to Moores and Corbin and Shoe Lane, was owned by the Johnsons family, and I think they need to be recognized, and please stand up. So the taking of the land was the land that was owned by this people. Not quite sure how the Walkers came into play, but that land was owned by that family. Also, I wanted to kind of piggyback or land back on something that Cassandra said, which is typically people tend to say a lot of times, we as Black people should pick ourselves up and do better and work hard. I don't know if you understand that the people who owned that land were doctors, dentists, lawyers. I can speak for my father. He was one of the first Black men as an aerospace engineer at NASA. There were principals, there were teachers. So these are not people who were just hanging around and not taking care of business. They worked hard. They had bachelor's degrees, they had master's degrees. Back in those days, that was very, very unheard of from Black people. So we did not just happen to be here and nobody gave us anything. My parents worked very hard, as well as all the other families that lived within that area. And we indeed were a family and a true community that looked out for one another and took care of one another.
Yeah, I'm old and I'm white. So here it is. Every white person in here, we were taught to be white, to be better than anybody else, right? And it wasn't overt. It was in the movies. It was on the radio. Well, because I grew up in the 50s. It was on television. And you have to admit that to yourself before you change. And until we, white people, change, this is going to keep going on. The things that you guys talked about, absolutely true. But I heard this in the 60s. And it seemed to disappear for a while, right? We thought, oh, we're all better now, right? And then what happened just in the past 10 years, right? It became okay to be white and powerful again, which is BS. We have to change, and we can change at the university level, but that's not where I learned to be white. I learned to be white at home. So you young people, you're the one who's going to change things with your families. Us old people, we're useless. We are useless. If my advice to you, never vote for an old white guy. I had something important to say. I forget what it was. Because I'm old. But we do need to change. Yeah, I've been around. I'm not from this area, but in the 70s, I spent 6 years here. I was in the military. I went on and did other things, but I've been around the world. And I will tell you this right now, this whole notion of white supremacy, it's a name that I think white people gave themselves because I have never met a more insecure people in the world than white people. We're not superior, we're afraid.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more, so if you're planning to come up, please come up.
Good afternoon. My name's Kevin Lyles. I'm on the alumni board, actually. I graduated back in the 1900s, and I want to kind of throw a little bit of light and a little bit of positivity into some of the things that have gone on today. Thank you for the council. I enjoyed everybody's comments. Very pertinent. But I want to emphasize that CNU does have a distressful past. I've been here since 1983. I met my wife here. I believe my family comes from CNU. But I want to say some of the things you talked about today, 6% African American, that's not the first time I heard that. I heard it from President Kelly. And I think you got the right people in place now that we can have this discussion. Adelia Thompson, great person. There's people here that are absolutely set on getting this problem right. But I want to talk to you also just about, you mentioned kind of loosely that we're not looking at history. I think African American history should be taught as a mandatory thing because there's a Clint Eastwood movie I like where he tells his Marines, you need to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And if you've ever looked at the history of blacks in this country, we have prospered and overcome and achieved in spite of every obstacle put in front of us. And that's why everybody should be studying black history. That's the example you need to learn. That's the success that you need to learn. So thank you.
Good evening to this great panel, to my pastor, Pastor Spencer. My name is Marion Kirby, and I have not heard Royers Lane mentioned tonight. I was born and raised on Royers Lane, and it was a very close neighborhood. Everybody loved everyone, mostly families, and most of us was relatives. What I would love to do, if I could, speak to the panel or the city, the men that were from the city that came with a school was supposed to have been put down in Royals Lane. As you can see, the school is on Ward Boulevard. And we had to move out, scattered people all over the place. But the worst thing of all, it was deliberately done. Up in Oyster Point, there were thousands of acres of land that they could have put 2 colleges this size on. But they came, and like they have already explained to you all, they took our land. But you know why I feel good? Because I know that all white people are not the same and not like that. But there's one thing certain. Our Heavenly Father knows exactly what went down. And everybody that's guilty, they're going to answer to the Father. But I would love to look at them eyeball to eyeball and tell me, why did you do that? You had to do it out of hatred. Because the land was up there, trees. They had to cut all those trees down to do what they did. But they came instead and took our property. God bless. Thank you.
My name is Dwayne Johnson, and I guess I can say, in short, legacy lost, because it was my father, his father, and my great-grandfather that all grew up on, or worked that land. My great-grandfather bought a little over 30 acres that is now covered by the college, for the most part, back in 1907. So this land had been in our family for over 100 years. Now, it's kind of funny that a lot of the move to put the college here happened just after my grandfather submitted plans to the city to build a housing development for middle-class blacks, okay? So we're looking like late 50s when this occurred. So now come this early 60s, eminent domain, we now see what is left of that. So basically, I just want to put a face to one of the families that lost a lot during that period. And the other thing I want to say, as a longtime resident of Shoe Lane, growing up on Shoe Lane, knowing William Walker, I was friends with his grandkids, I consider it an insult that he has a plaque on that land, because he was a purchaser from what was considered Johnson's Terrace. That vision of that neighborhood was not his. It was my grandfather's. He was the one that submitted plans to get it done. And ultimately, he was the one that had his lands taken. So that vision was lost. So I don't know where that information came from about William Walker. Growing up in that neighborhood, I've never known him do anything to help the neighbor. The thing is, he was just a purchaser of that land, and he just built a house. As far as his vision, helping us out, I have no knowledge of that. Okay, so I just want to set that straight and let you know, yeah, I do find that Walker's Green an insult.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jennifer Burgess Brooks, and I'm the president of the Newport News NAACP. And I thought it would be remiss if I didn't say anything. But I did want to say this on this evening, and that is, thank you all for what you have done. You came here and you've given us history, and we thank you for that. But I just say today, where do we go from here? And I'm kind of going to bounce off of what Pastor said, the Baptist pastor preached this morning, what he just said. And that is that we need to be represented at CNU. You know, and not just represented, but feel like that we are part of CNU. Take ownership that we are a part of the university. And I also want to say that I thank Dr. Kelly for this. This is the beginning of something great. You know, we have already had conversations about making changes and coming up with ideas about how we can make things better here at CNU. So we've already began to have those conversations. But I think that this is a great start of something new. This is the first of many meetings that we need to come together. This is not just the first meeting, but I hope that we're going to have more meetings where people come together. And I also have to say thank you to those families. I just have to say we have to give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I just pray healing for you. I pray healing for you. We talked about healing. You know, the panel talked a little bit about that, and we talked about history. But today we also want to change history. We want to create new history, good history. And we know the history that we've had, but we want to create new history as well, where we're seeing our students that are benefiting from this. More African-American students at CNU being involved, more properties here in this area. And so I just wanted to say that to you. Thank you so much for the beginning of this, and I hope that this is the first of many minds coming together. Thank you so much.
Last speaker, unfortunately, we are really running out of time, so I will
Sorry.
give this young lady a chance.
Good evening. My name is Chelsea Hodo. I'm a sophomore here at CNU. I don't want to turn this into a political debate, but I am of the belief that race is inherently political because of the systemic oppression that this country and also this school was built on. Governor Youngkin has made a mission to eliminate what he calls critical race theory in Virginia education, which he considers any divisive discussion of race. And I just hope that the university continues to stand by what was said today and continues to try to make amends even when there is pushback from political parties.
I would like to thank all of you who came out first and all of you who are live streaming our program. I want to thank the Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander. I don't know what the printer was doing, but that is the Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander, Reverend William Spencer, Ms. Audrey Perry Williams, Dr. Johnny Finn, and Dr. Philip Hamilton. Thank all of you. And I really would be remiss if I did not thank our President Kelly for his leadership on making sure that this conversation happened on this campus. We have a DEI council, which I chair, and the university is committed to leaning into this issue and seeking higher ground, as President Kelly often says, and I take him at his word. So thank you so much. I hope you have a safe journey home. And this is the beginning of a conversation and more actions to come.
I'll see you. We'll be in touch. Yeah. Do you mind if I text you sometime?